See, I got my evening jacket on, I got my Beethoven t-shirt going on. I think it's about time to talk about some neo-prog. Let's dive into this guy. Seas of Change by Galahad. So Galahad is one of those well-known neo-prog groups, founded themselves in the mid-80s, but didn't actually put out any sizable material until about the early to mid-90s. For me, the one that put them on the map was Empires Never Lasts, and for me, their outputs have been kind of hit and miss. Their last couple of albums have been a little bit lackluster, especially the one that they put out last year of Quiet Storms. It was a lot of reworking of old material. It reminded me very much of Eye of the Soundscape from Riverside, but what we have here is a concept album. The thing that made me pay attention is that it is essentially just one song. I love when a band puts out just kind of one song that spans from like the 40 to the 60-minute range. When they do something like this, it limits themselves into what they can do, but what they can do in that limitation is just outstanding. What we have here is a little bit of a mixed grab bag in terms of what works and what doesn't. I want to talk about first what works. And right off the get-go, I gotta say, the lead singer of Stu Nichols, the guy has the chops. His vocal work is so smooth, it's so melodic. The control, the knowledge of when to add those little bit of flourishes and when to bring it back and be very subtle. The guy's a master on the vocals, and I love his presentation straight out of the rulebook for neo-prog. Like, it's really channeling that gesture spirit of that lamenting, that sorrowfulness, that emotional outpour. It's very theatrical. Some of the movements, I should say, really hit just right in here, especially within the rhythm section and within the grooving section. I guess second last movement, where it's got that really bumping rhythm, it's really rocking out. The repeat that I have in my mind is Faces, where they're saying faces, faces, everywhere is faces, 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 everywhere there's faces. That I really enjoyed. I love the repetition of it. It felt very clean, as well as, I want to say it's Dusk. It's either Dusk or Up in Smoke. One of those two movements really energized me. And overall, I do want to say that the presentation of music, although it is a mixed grab bag, when it hits hard. And that's part of the reason why I love these longer tracks, because when we get to those really great builds, it's such a great payoff when we get to that point. Now, unfortunately, with this, I feel like the drawbacks overweigh the benefits on here. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the drawbacks. The first one is just the beginning. This guy has 5, I counted them, 5 intros. There's Storms A-Comin', Lords, Ladies and Gentlemen, The Great Unknown, and it isn't really until The Sea of Uncertainty that I feel like that the album really got its kick. Up until that point, it felt like being in a car where somebody is just learning how to use a stick shift and there's a lot of stop and go. And I could not get into it. Like, the moment that I started feeling the groove and feeling the progression of the album, they stop it off to do another kind of weird introduction track. And the other thing is, a lot of these intro tracks are not good. I am fully aware that I'm pretty much immune to pretentious songwriting and pretentious over-the-top and overblown musical styles. I mean, I love progressive rock. You don't get much more pretentious than progressive rock, and I love the presentation of that, and I don't let it get in the way. But here is one of the few times I actually do feel it, and I do feel like it gets in the way, because once we get to Lords, Ladies and Gentlemen, and we get like this strange narrator that honestly never comes up again. Like, he's only really at the very beginning, where he's saying, "Lords, ladies and gentlemen, strap yourselves in for debauchery and this overblown self-indulgence." And it's not tongue-in-cheek as, say, like the Devin Townsend would be with Ziltoid, but it's very like serious. And I was just like, man, get over yourself. It's not that big of a deal. Like, I know what you're talking about is pretty heavy stuff, but you don't need to lace it with that. And on top of that, they use a strange recording and a sound recording, and it's very jarring to hear a selection of soundbite is taken from somebody else, and the mixing doesn't really align with your own mixing, because you can hear the volume difference between the two. And there's a few points where that just doesn't work, and there's a background track that doesn't quite fit with the overall atmosphere of the sound. So you could have done it one of two ways. You could either frame the music that you have in and around the background track of the recording that you're using to make it work with it so that it's not as jarring and out of place. Or you could re-record it with your own vocals like this Lords, Ladies, and Gentlemen guy. But because they didn't do either of those, it just felt very out of place. I felt like they could have gone one of two ways and they tried to do both and it just didn't work. And so for me, that was a huge drawback and it really got me out of the music. And another thing on this is how many callbacks we have to other musical stylings. Once we finally do get into it within the Great Unknown and we have this very soaring, I guess, guitar work with an organ piece, it is a sheer callback to Shine On You Crazy Diamond from Pink Floyd. The guitar work is essentially a David Gilmour ripoff, because at this point, who hasn't heard that and who doesn't know that comparison? And similarly, I want to say it's either Up in Smoke or A Sense of Revolution, where this is when Stu is saying the wall of death is lowered in Grand Central Square, or Grand Central whatever it is, the place that they're in. And I mean, it's a direct callback to Lamb Lies Down on Broadway, where they say the wall of death is lowered in Times Square. And it brought me out because, again, who doesn't know the callback? And instead of being one of those, soft winks to the audience by being subtle, it was like watching a movie and everybody just stops, turns at the camera and be like, eh? And like the audience is like, yeah. And now I do feel like I'm ragging on this album quite a bit, but I did feel very disconnected. Like, the later half of this album is definitely the strong points. Like the tracks that we have on there, the movements that we have on there are definitely pumping. It's very grooving. It's much more energetic because by that point the momentum and the energy is just thriving and going. At that beginning, it felt like they were really like wandering the landscape without getting any perch. Tying this all back together, the final ending of this album doesn't really feel like a grand ending. We just have that final track of the greater unknown, essentially. And then the storms are a coming reprised, and it didn't feel like a unified ending. So overall, this album is definitely a mixed grab bag. I mean, when it hits hard, and I love it. There's probably only two movements on here, though, that I really connect to and I really groove along for. I feel like this worked a lot better as a concept. Like, on paper, this should have worked. A neo-prog concept album that's one track that tackles political ideology, what it means to be political, that whole the king is dead, long live the king kind of an idea. But in the actual presentation, it just fell flat. Overall, I gotta say, if this is your kind of music, I'd probably go for a stream. Gotta stream this album. I felt like the concept was over their grasp. Like, their grasp was more than their reach or something along those lines, and it just didn't quite work for me. But that isn't to say that this album is a complete loss. That's it for me for Seas of Change by Galahad. What did you guys think? Did you love it? Did you hate it? Let me know of your own thoughts by commenting down below. Thank you guys so much for watching. As always, you guys are definitely the best. And until next time, notes out.